it made a lot of sense to my young traumatized brain that there is an authoritarian father, and if you mess up, he will punish you extremely.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Jenna, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I really appreciate you having me. I really appreciate having you on the podcast. We initially connected because you had seen a TikTok. I started a TikTok for this podcast. Wasn't really expecting it to do much, but it at least reached you, which I was very grateful for. And you emailed me. And so I wanted to just give you a chance to kind of introduce who you are, what you do, and what we're here to talk about today.
Awesome. So yeah, I saw your TikTok and just kind of loved the conglomerates of ideas that you were bringing together. And I thought, I fit in there. I've deconstructed my faith, also advocate for mental health online. And I figured that it would be a fun fit. And
I'm still listening.
Oh, you're fine. Like, technology is not my strong suit, despite the fact that I have a TikTok and an Insta and a YouTube, and I'm an author. Yeah, technology in me.
It eludes us all.
Yes, it does.
So which came first? Your affinity for writing and wanting to publish a book, your need to assist people and talk about mental health online? What kind of came first, and then how did it lead to the rest?
In first grade, I was entered in a young authors contest. And I have just always written as an outlet, and it changes and has always changed, like whether I would focus on poetry or short story or fiction. And now I understand like that there are certain authors that are, primarily write one type or another, but regardless of form, writing's always been an outlet for me to try and understand my world and the world better.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of your world, for people who are just meeting this podcast for the first time, your world involves being raised religious. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about your background and what that was like in the church that you were raised in.
Absolutely. So we went, I come from childhood trauma, and escaping that, we got into Pentecostal evangelical spaces, first with the Assemblies of God and then with the Church of God. And it made a lot of sense to my young traumatized brain that there is an authoritarian father, and if you mess up, he will punish you extremely.
Yes.
Like, I took this message into my soul.
Yes.
I heard somebody online who was like, Christians don't really believe in hell, because if they did, they would be like every cashier and clerk. They'd be like, that was me, because childhood trauma had taught me that, your parent will absolutely do this to you. And I was afraid for everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was super devout, and just this poor little ball of anxiety. We hadn't, the education in my family to understand like the psychological terms or anything. And my mom tried, like, we were very poor, but she tried to find like therapists for my sister and I, and there was just not access. And so I poured all of my hurt and all of my energy into the church.
Right.
I have read the Bible, I can't tell you how many times, like it's probably in 24 in tons of different translations. Like, I had the big Greek and Hebrew concordances because I absolutely needed to know what I was supposed to do, what I wasn't, how to please my father. It's very important to know how to do that.
Yes. Wow. And so when she was seeking a mental health professional to work with you, did she make the connection between your religion and your faith giving you the mental trauma, or was the trauma, did she think based on something totally different? Like, how did that go? Like, what was her experience in terms of what she thought you needed counseling for?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely did not connect religion, because this was a much safer space than the space we were fleeing from.
Got it.
So, going from uh, my my mom's, both of her parents are narcissists, and her mom has been described by her therapist as a psychopath, like
Wow.
very, very dysfunctional background.
Right.
To marrying with my biological father, an abusive narcissist, and then going from that into the church, like then it's just emotional abuse, and it's so much less, and you don't notice it if you come from this highly abusive background. Like this seems loving and caring and generous, and it doesn't seem like there's all these strings and things in the background.
Right. Absolutely. I talked to a friend of mine who's a cult survivor about that same exact thing, how it's so easy for churches and for cults to bring people into the fold when those people are escaping another abusive relationship, escaping another scenario in which somebody else in a position of authority was giving them all the rules and telling them how to live their life. You think, oh, I'm escaping this abusive situation, I'm never going to be taken advantage of like that again, when really you're like, I'm so used to being told what to do all the time, I need somebody else to tell me what to do all the time. And then churches are like, we have a father figure for you. Mm-hmm. Here you go.
But this one's a good father. Like, he'll take care of you. And because you have these wounds, like you desperately want that experience. Even your subconscious seeks that out. So like people who come from narcissistic relationships often end up in romantic relationships with a narcissist, because subconsciously they're trying to replay their upbringing with a different outcome, which absolutely doesn't happen. And
it's
so
like,
then,
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was going to say, so then you just take that to church.
Right. Absolutely. It's like you, in your effort to try and take that power back, what you're actually doing is you're just repeating the cycle if you're not careful. That's wild. And so you stayed religious up until past the point that you were married, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how'd you meet your husband? And then how did you come to the conclusion that maybe you weren't as religious as you thought?
So met the Hubs in church. I did the whole purity culture, kiss dating goodbye thing. Like, we got a wild story, and I won't go into all the details because like it's juicy. Like there's some very, So, but so we met in church, and from the first date to us getting married was 4.5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had never dated anybody. Like I said, I kissed dating goodbye, like very devout, had never dated anyone, had never kissed anybody. My nickname in high school was the Ice Queen. Oh. And it was well earned. Like I wouldn't even go to dances. Like I just turned everybody down. But from the moment I saw this man, I was just attracted, period. And I hadn't really felt attraction before, just the way my brain works. And it was very scary, and I was head over heels. And I really, for me, this is part of where I'm like, I still believe in a God. Like, looking at my story, I'm like, this is not coincidence. There's just too much to it. But we get married and moved from Ohio to Tennessee, where he was going to Lee University. It's a very religious town. There's the headquarters for the Church of God of Cleveland, which we call the Vatican.
Wow. So they've never reached back out to me. I've reached out to them a bunch of times to be on the podcast. They never get back to me.
Oh, no, they have an image to uphold. Yeah. And it's very patriarchal. So I doubt, as a woman doing a podcast.
Yeah, that's true. Touche.
Yes. So we get married. We find a church that for us was kind of liberal. They didn't have any American flags in the church, and we were like, why don't you have a flag? Right?
Are they real Christians? I don't know if that's a real Christian if you don't have an American flag.
Same. And they were like, well, we have people from all countries here, and we want them to feel welcome and not excluded because of their nationality. And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. So it was, while being evangelical, and I would say still conservative, they weren't affirming. They were pushing the conservative boundaries. They were very welcoming for like immigration and for the reform of poverty, like really did a lot on outreach, and it was a
Interesting.
small church. So it was a good place to land and kind of helping me to detox some of the views I had. But I am, despite like getting totally sucked into church, kind of skeptical by nature. I'm very inquisitive. And one day the pastor's up there teaching on tithe. And I went, having read the Bible numerous times, I was like, I think I need to do a deep dive on this, because I know the New Testament doesn't say anything about tithing. Zero. It's give, and in the measure that you give, it will be given back. And I was like, okay, let me dig in. Well, that was the domino that started my deconstruction. Because if you look into tithe in the Old Testament, there's at least 3 different tithes described there, at least. And one of the tithes states that, you go to Jerusalem to celebrate the goodness of God. And if it is too far to take your 10th, you sell what you have and take the money. And when you get to Jerusalem, you buy, and I quote, whatever your heart desires. And there's this long list of like ox or sheep or whatever. And in the list is wine and strong drink. Then I went, wait, you take a 10th, you save a 10th of your money.
Yeah.
You go to Jerusalem, you have a giant party in which you remember the poor and the priest, and you have all the alcohol to celebrate God. And
you get an ox, you get some wine, and it's a party.
yeah. It's like a biblical kegger. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And I was shook because, growing up and being taught like how, evil and how, you definitely don't drink. And that's the Bible clearly says.
Yeah. That was my first thought too, is I'm like, wait a second. The majority of at least American branches of Christianity are all like, don't drink. Like, we exalt those who say that they're abstaining from alcohol. And so when you realize that, like, what did that do in terms of kind of catapulting you towards deconstruction? Did you just start to notice like a bunch of loopholes there in the Bible?
Well, that was like, I was shook. And then I tried to bring it up to the pastor's wife, and the reception I got was, very reserved. Then I went, that's odd. And then the next domino was hell. And so I started researching on that. I read lots of different theological books on it. There's so many theological books.
So many.
And to realize that the view of a eternal, lasting, conscious torment was like borrowed from mythology. It's literally Hellenized from Greek mythology, and that it was recent to the Christian faith and not at all in the Jewish faith. And I was like, wait, so God isn't just ready to punish everybody?
Wow.
It made sense. Like, I had been beginning to heal from some of my trauma, and it made sense. But then that was when I could, because I was questioning my beliefs was no longer tied to like eternal torment.
Right.
I could really start to dig in without fear and be curious.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can learn when you're not afraid of burning forever for learning it, right? It's amazing how much research you're willing to do. Yeah, That's wild. And so at this point, did you think like, I can't talk to my husband about this because he's religious, or was he moving in that direction? What was that like?
So I like to chit chat. And so I had brought up some of the stuff that I had been like processing. I'd brought up the tithe, I'd brought up hell. And I don't remember what it was that, I was deconstructing the atonement and what the atonement meant, because we'd only ever heard of the, the penal substitutionary atonement theory, which is that Jesus's death atones for your sins, like pays the price. Right. And then to learn that there are there's 7 main atonement theories. And so I'm talking about the atonement theory. And like, so I was like, so Jesus's death didn't have to be for our sins. It could have been for this or for this. And my hubs was like, yeah, and you know what? I don't think there has to be a virgin birth either. And I was like, say what? Like, okay, I'm going to stop talking now. Mm-hmm. And so he had been quietly deconstructing for several years and just hadn't, didn't want to rock my boat. And so then we find ourselves both in this place of like, this can be true without being literal, and then exploring together, and all the other dominoes fell like in rapid succession as we were doing this together. And it was very beautiful.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's really cool that he's over there being like, I don't know how true this is, but she seems like she's having a good time. So I'm just going to let her come to her own conclusions. And then you meet in the middle. I mean, for only having dated for 4 months, it sounds like you picked the right person though, right? It sounds like that first like love at first sight feeling was accurate. So that's 100%.
Like,
yeah.
The best human, and you cannot convince me otherwise.
Yeah. And how long have you guys been married at this point?
During like now, or when we were deconstructing?
Right now.
It'll be 21 years in March.
Oh, wow.
We got married at 20, so.
Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. And so you both kind of admit, like, we're not as into this as we thought we were, and you start your deconstruction process. And then is that when you decided you kind of wanted to advocate for people and for mental health, or is that unrelated? Where did you go from there?
So kind of parallel. Let's see, about 5 years ago, it was Christmas season, which was always hard for me. And one morning I woke up and I was very numb and robotic, and I could observe this, but I wasn't feeling anything. I was like, this is odd.
Yeah.
And I couldn't remember what had happened the past several days. Like I had no memory of, like 3, 4, 5 days before. And Jonathan would ask me questions, and I would respond very robotically, and I couldn't do anything other. I was just absolutely numb. And he was really concerned.
Yeah.
And and I was concerned, but in a detached way. And he was like, what's going on? And I didn't know. I had never heard of the term dissociation or dissociative amnesia. I was like, I think that somehow we've triggered a childhood coping mechanism that I thought I had healed from, but apparently I haven't. And I think I need therapy. So that sent me into the therapist's office. So paralleling, one of the, I think, reasons it was finally safe for me to start exploring this was because I was no longer feeling threatened by an almighty father with eternal torment. So now it's like I can explore other things outside of, am I doing everything right all the time?
Yeah.
Which is so harmful and damaging.
Yes.
Like, me now looks at me then, and the compassion, like, I wish I could go back and tell her sooner.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I started on therapy, and right away, there were some clues that I was not going to be the average therapy patient. The therapist asked if my husband could join us in therapy, which is not the usual request, by the way.
Yeah.
I was just in trying to explain why I came to therapy. I got so triggered, and I got drawn back into a flashback, which I didn't know that's what that was either, because I thought flashbacks were all visual. I didn't know that flashbacks can be emotional or auditory or any of your other senses. And at the end of me trying to tell the therapist for an hour why I was there, they said, can your husband maybe come next time? And so I said, sure. He fills out the forms. And next time as I go and I start like getting sucked in, he just put his hand on my leg, and it was grounding, which I also didn't know what that was yet, but it was keeping me in the present so that I could talk about things that were going on emotionally or in the past without being as sucked into them.
Yeah.
So we started that process.
Wow.
And
I think that's a testament for him as a person too, that he can be the person who brings you back from that disassociation.
yes,
Interesting. Now,
yeah.
with something like DID, is that something that you're born with that is later like brought to the surface by trauma, or is that something that trauma causes so you can be like at any stage in your life and then it happens to you?
So there's not a huge body of research because it's, well, one, pharmaceuticals don't treat it. So DID, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder, for those who aren't familiar with dissociative identity disorder, doesn't respond to a pharmaceutical because the voices that I'm hearing are not a hallucination. They are parts of self that have been locked away due to traumatic experience between with amnesic walls. So like there's not access to them. And because pharmaceuticals aren't used to treat it, like, why are they going to research this thing that's not that common? Though it's about as common as OCD. It's 1% of the population. It's as common as natural redheads.
Interesting.
Right? As prevalence, not diagnosis. So like we know, like with ADHD, the prevalence and the diagnosis rate are different. Lots of people have it, not diagnosed.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't know I had it till about 36.
Same. I was like almost 30 when I was diagnosed formally.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did you had asked something and I had segued into.
Oh, I was just saying, is it something that you're born with, or is it something that can be developed?
Right. So there is a genetic predisposition to use dissociation as a coping mechanism. However, you can have that predisposition and never develop DID.
Right.
DID, the ingredients that you need are a insecure or disorganized attachment style. So that means your attachment to your primary caregiver is not stable for whatever reason. And this happens very early. Attachment styles develop very early. So an insecure or disorganized attachment style. And then you need repeated inescapable trauma. And it can be any kind of trauma. Some people who have DID, it was developed by medical trauma, which is definitely, if you're this is something that is inescapable. You're going in for multiple procedures. This is repeated.
Yeah, absolutely.
The most common trauma that we're aware of that causes this is sexual abuse, but it is by far not the only thing that can cause it.
Interesting. So if you're born with the predisposition, but you don't face any kind of major repetitive trauma, it could never surface. But if you have it and then you face trauma, it can come out at any point.
Well, so our current theory, we'll go with, says that everyone experiences a fragmented sense of consciousness until a certain age. So if you've ever seen a toddler, you're going to track with this example, where 1 minute they are having a total meltdown.
Right.
And then like a little light flip, and then they're fine and they're playing and they're just like nothing ever happened because their consciousness isn't unified yet. They're in little ego states. So you have the ego state of play and the ego state of the need for security. And so I know for sure there's play, like curiosity, seeking out, there's like comfort from caregiver. And so we have all these ego states and they're kind of separate until we get to a certain age and our brain like grows a consciousness around it, like an orange with a skin. So if repeated inescapable trauma happens before your brain develops this unifying consciousness around your ego states, it can keep them separate and put amnesic walls between them. This means that, say, the need for play and curiosity is walled off with amnesia from a need for caregiver at home where that is unsafe. So I can go to school and learn and play and not be aware that home is not a safe place.
Interesting.
Right. And so once the brain learns to grow this skin, then other disorders might be formed, like BPD, or I've heard some others. And this is just the current understanding. Like I said, there's not a lot of funded research. So according to our current understanding, once the brain learns how to unify consciousness, you don't form DID.
Interesting. That's
Mhm.
wild. That like compartmentalization.
Yes.
So is it something, to the extent that you know, is it something that mostly is developed during childhood and then just kind of reappears as an adult? Or do you think an adult could just formulate it then during adulthood?
So I do think that it's formed during childhood, but a lot of systems go dormant. My system was not active at all in my teen years and my
Right.
early adult years. So from what I hear from other multiples, the things that seem to bring a system back into activity are, one, a new trauma that kind of triggers the old operating mechanism, where this is how you survived these sort of things, and you have something that trips that back into, oh, we need to operate this way again. Um, or, and for my case, it was kind of a little of both, I think. You reach a place of safety so that your brain is like, oh, hey, all that trauma that we have walled off, you're now able to process. So why don't we
Oof.
start lowering these walls a little,
Yeah.
and you can start processing that.
Yeah. Which is great
So
because that means you feel safe, but it's bad because that means you have to like go through that all over again. You have to re-experience that.
exactly.
Wow, interesting. So it's like, in a way, it's like it's a compliment to your husband that you started processing all this trauma in his presence, because it means he's a safe
Mhm.
spot for you. Wow. And so throughout all of this, what has your relationship been with your family or anybody that you had relationships back when you were devout? Is it the same? Did it take time to heal? Are you no contact? What is that like?
So it depends on the person. I've learned a lot, like you said, about safety through this. So learning that,
Right.
okay, my husband is a safe person, safe enough that all of this can start coming. And then I'm very symptomatic because now my brain is like, oh, yay, let's unpack all of the stuff that we just shoved down for
Yeah.
decades. Um, so I'm learning that I have multiple personalities, that I have an alter who is an angry lesbian, and an alter, oh, she is mad about life too, and an alter that is a little girl who doesn't remember any trauma. And I'm realizing these things, and I'm in church and I'm like, if I tell people this, they'll think I'm demon possessed.
Oh, yeah.
That's 100%. Like, so now all of these people that I've known and that I've walked through life with are not safe for me to walk through this
Right.
hugely important thing that I'm going through. Like, hey, pray for me because JA, the angry lesbian part, she's really mad that we're married to a man, and she wants nothing to do with Jonathan, and she won't listen to me that he's safe. So I could use everybody's prayer right now. Like, that's not going to fly.
Wow. So, and I know that in like crime dramas and things like that, they make it a very like, it's me, no, it's me, no, it's me, no, it's me. And I
Mhm.
imagine it's not like that at all. But
Right.
is there a time, do you ever have moments where you're like, I'm feeling more like that person today, I need to like let him know, or I'm feeling more, or is it literally you don't remember, but he tells you you were those people for a time?
So presentation with D.I.D will vary wildly from system to system, which is what they call a person with
Right.
D.I.D. They'll call them multiples, or the technical term, like the psychobabble term, is a system. It's a system of altered states of consciousness working together. So if I talk about an alter, that's short for altered state of consciousness, and is the psychological term for a different personality. And so I don't have a lot of amnesia within my system. Some systems have very strong amnesic walls, so they won't remember what another part does while they're out. And this is where you get the, oh no, it's me portrayals. But the
Right.
thing is, like, if you wouldn't remember what you did, not that it wouldn't be like in your psyche, like you're not free from consequences, but if you wouldn't remember what you did for a day, like what would you do? Like,
Interesting.
right? So for what usually happens when I have little bits of amnesia is they buy snacks, like
That's probably
literally.
what I would do too, honestly. Nothing bad. I would
Uh-huh,
just buy a lot of snacks.
yeah, buy snacks, and
Maybe buy a pet from the pet store or something like that.
Right. Right. And so even those with amnesia, like you learn to trust yourself. It's kind of a beautiful process of being like,
Yeah.
oh, like I'm okay. Even the wounded parts of me, like maybe they need a lot of care, but they're not going to do anything harmful.
Right.
So I tend to remember, but sometimes I will have like amnesia, and he'll be like, oh hey, so I don't know how much you remember of last night, because certain altars I will have more amnesia with, but he notices switches, usually without me telling. So body language changes, and a lot of times our intonation, our speech rhythm changes, and so he can pick us out. It's like knowing an identical twin. Like
Right.
they look the same, but it's not the same person.
Right.
So he knows us very well. When we're kind of blended is like more difficult to suss out, because he'll be like, who's fronting, which is the term for the altar that's in control of the body.
Yeah.
So Jenna is fronting right now, and I'm the one who fronts the most. I do day-to-day activities, so he'll be like, who's fronting, and I'm like, I really, I don't know. And then he'll start being like, so you attracted to men?
Yeah.
Because we have a very strong divide. We have like the guys are attracted to women, Devi and Caleb, and then JA identifies as a lesbian, definitely attracted to women. I identify as bi. And then we have the ones that are attracted to men. And so like kind of sussing out like things like taste, because that changes. Like I hate salmon with a deep soul loathing. I
Huh.
hate it. And Lil and Anthony really enjoy the taste of salmon. And because Lil and I share a lot of memories, I can remember how it tastes for her. Like I
Yeah.
remember it tastes good. It's nasty. I put it in my mouth and I'm like, nope, does not. So he can
Weird.
kind of ask some questions and get an idea of who's blending.
He's like, question number 1, can I have a kiss? And if you're like, no, he's like, okay, that narrows it down to like 4.
Actually, yes, that is one of the like easily one of the ways that he can tell.
That's really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the initial email that you sent me to reach out, you mentioned that you are no longer religious, but you are spiritual. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
about that. I feel like that is something I run into a lot, is people who escape a traumatic religion, but they still find joy in spirituality. And what does that look like for you?
So we have had, and by we, I mean the system, experiences that we can't explain outside of there is a God. So, for instance, when JA first came out of dormancy, um, she came at the point that the brain hit the shutdown button. So where we could no longer process the trauma that she held, she opened back up at that point. And to find us living in the house with a man was absolutely intolerable. Like, because all men are dangerous. You can't trust any men. And she is getting ready for bed, like mentally ranting about how like all men will hurt you. They are inconsiderate. They don't look beyond their own experience to understand what other people are going through. And she's going on and on. And what we can only describe as like God intervening, because it's not like our internal voices of each other, just kind of interrupted and said, oh, like white people. And her instant reaction, because like where we grew up, there was a good population of people of color. And because our violence was perpetrated by people who look like us, people of color tend to be like safe. And so she was like, well, not all white people. And it was that pause of, exactly. So then not all men. And then she was pissed. And she was like, wait, so so you're telling me that there is actually a God, because each altar has their own kind of belief system. She was like, so you're telling me there is actually a God, and you, instead of solving hunger in Africa and war wherever else, took time out of your day to drop this nugget on me. Like, can we cuss on this podcast?
Oh yeah, yeah. Go
She's
for it.
like, fuck you. Like, and like all of that. That's another thing to tell us apart is language. Like, loves all the words. But from that moment on, like, she believes in God, because the only thing that could help direct her out of her spiral was something that she could relate to in a non-traumatic way, like that. Yeah. And so that really shook her and gave her pause. And then she was pissed at God, but also like, but you made a good point. Like, yes, white people are the same. Like, we need to look outside our own experiences and consider others. But there are those that do make that attempt. So maybe there are men that do make that attempt. Yeah. And Jen, who went through our teen years and took the brunt of religious trauma, has had a lot of spiritual experiences. I've had a lot of spiritual experiences. And while we've been able to say, okay, this is religion, this is trauma, this is straight up like the worst, there are things that we're like, but I don't have any other explanation for this except that there is a loving consciousness out there. Mm-hmm. And so I have been looking into all kinds of different faiths, and I've fallen into what I call same thing, different name. And so prayer for a while was like triggering. And then I'm finding, as I'm reading other faiths, the same practice, but they call it a different thing. They might call it like setting intention, where you imagine this thing that you would like that is not the thing that you have, and then you lift it up into the universe. Or if you, depending on what kind of witchy branch, casting a spell where you hold hands if you're in a group and all agree on this one thing and end it with "so mote it be," which, might I say, is what amen means, so may it be. And I was like, wait. So witchy spell casting is like prayer, especially when they're anointing things with oil and like burning incense. I was like, wait, so this is the same thing that we're doing in Pentecostal circles. Y'all just call it a different. Yeah. But because I then had different names I could call it, I was able to separate from the trauma I received and then still enjoy some of these spiritual practices. Yeah. Without being triggered by them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always thought that there was a very important distinction between believing in God and believing in religions. I was just talking to somebody about that last night, how I don't think that the rosary matters. I don't think if you say it 10 times, you're going to, if you say the Hail Mary 10 times, you're going to be forgiven any more than somebody else. But I do think that if you feel peace and comfort with your rosary in your hand, that matters to you. Or like you said, if you are being witchy, and you're anointing yourself with oils, if that gives you that same feeling of peace and love, and you can forgive yourself when you do those things, that matters. But I don't think that any religion is overall right, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Now, in that moment when God's voice spoke to J.A., J.A., right, is the name? Okay.
Yes.
How, in that moment, what was it about that voice that didn't make you think it was somebody else that you didn't realize you had internally? What was the separation there?
One, because that's not when you're having a conversation with yourself internally. For me, it's different, because if another altar is speaking internally to me, it sounds like a different voice. It's not audible because it is a different part of my consciousness, talking to a different part of my consciousness. But this wasn't like our back and forth. This was like a nugget drop, like a mic drop into our soul, and just resonated with information that none of us had thought of, because we were all trying to bring her down, because she was absolutely spiraling about living in a house with like she was literally in fight or flight. She was like shaken, like so mad about it. And none of us had been able to reach her.
Right.
And so for this to come out of the blue and just resonate, and her not to have anything she could say about it,
Right.
like
It's
it
just
was,
like an intruder. Like, I don't want to say intruder, but it's like if somebody joined this Zoom and started talking to us and we would know
yes,
neither one of us let them in. I was like, I didn't let him
exactly.
in. I didn't let him in. I didn't let him in. You didn't let him in. That makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes
and
sense.
it was very much like that.
Yeah, I figured there had to be a very different feeling for that one for you to not think like, oh, there's somebody else here that I just hadn't discovered yet.
Right, it's just another one of us, because that does
Right.
happen. Altars come out of dormancy.
Yeah. And do your alters have a very similar voice to you audibly? Like whenever you hear their thoughts and their words, it like sounds like you, but a little bit deeper, sounds like you, but a little bit more masculine, or are they totally different?
It depends. So some of them are used to being very covert, and it's very hard to distinguish.
Mhm.
Caleb, we all say that Caleb hides. So like when I first started hearing him internally, I was like, wait, I don't think that was my thought. But it's so like went in with the train, and I was
Right.
like, but I don't think that was me. But then you get like Anthony, who identifies as like a very feminine gay man, and everything is very different, very different. The way his intonation and whatnot in inside is quite different. Um, so it varies from altar to altar.
Yeah, I imagine. And then is there a point in your life that this would happen or that you would even want it to happen? Is there a point in your life where they will cease to be? Would you want that? Would you rather them stick around? I wasn't sure if there was like a point in your process and your treatment that they slowly start to drop off, or do we not know and we'll just have to wait and find out as it happens?
So this is a combination of answers for that. Like,
Yeah. I know I asked like 6 questions in
oh,
one
I
there.
know. I love it. I love it. I really welcome curiosity, because when people are curious, that means they're engaging. When
Right.
people are like, oh, they don't have room to be curious because they're kind of threatened by
Just
it.
like,
So,
oh,
like,
okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
exactly.
They start using the word interesting a lot.
Yes. Yeah. So I welcome curiosity and questions. So right now, the two therapeutic approaches toward like an end goal with D.I.D is functional multiplicity and final fusion. So functional multiplicity is all of the alters are there, but information is integrated. So memory loss is not there. Awareness of trauma is shared with everybody, and everybody is working together. And then final fusion is all of the alters coming together to fuse into one single personality. So we don't have a lot of research, but the research we do have indicates that not everyone who wants to achieve final fusion can. And then some people who don't want that, their alters naturally fuse. And also a lot of times, because multiplicity has then become our primary language, if fusion happens, the brain has learned how to unify that stream of consciousness. It's grown that orange skin around everybody. New trauma can make it revert back to its primary language. Just like if someone's bilingual and stub their toe, they often revert back to their original language to cuss. The brain, right. And so this is how the brain knows how to deal with trauma. So rather than focus on one outcome or another, because like some days it's like, you know what, it would just be nice to be like a normal operating human. And other days I'm like, you know what, it's super nice that E doesn't have social anxiety and we have a party to go to. And guess who's going to the party? Not me, with all of my social anxiety. So
That's
our
cool.
goal has just been like whatever healing looks like. So we have been focused on making sure everybody is able to heal the things that they hold and live the best shared life that we can. And if fusion happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even consider the fact that at any point in your life, you can be re-traumatized entirely independently of the trauma that you're healing from and what that would do. And your husband probably just hopes that if everybody fuses, you're at least a little straight, like just a little bit, just like in there. There's just the fuse. It's like, well, the good news is we fused. We're all one. The bad news is I am 100% a lesbian. And
like totally.
Yeah.
Well, and he's already told me this year, he started to say, I think that you're like 95% lesbian. Like, I think you're homoflexible, and that I was just feminine enough that it worked for your very conservative brain.
Yeah.
But no, he actually is hoping that we don't fuse. Like, he's like, I would miss everybody, like, because he developed individual relationships with all of us. And even if those relationships aren't romantic for everybody, because it's certainly not for JA,
right.
Like he likes them for who they are.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you have just the most amazing support system. Well, and I realize system, that also works. Yeah. He's also a very supportive system. Yeah, it sounds like he's just an amazing person. It sounds like you did exactly what you needed to do in not dating anyone until you met him, and then just getting married to him as quick as you could to keep anybody else from taking him, because he sounds awesome.
That's what I said. I was like, had I waited any longer, somebody else would have snagged you up because you are a catch. And he was like, oh, whatever. I was like, no, if I die first, there will be a line of ladies with casserole dishes. Like, I promise you.
That's funny. He'd probably be like afraid that JA would like haunt him, be like, listen here, you now I'm in you. You thought you got rid of me, but I'm in you now.
Right.
Actually, that would be bad because she's into women.
She is into women.
So the ladies would still be welcome. Never mind. That's a bad plan.
No, she's very into women.
Very much. Well, I really had a wonderful time talking to you. And Jenna, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to the audience and give them kind of a thought to leave with today. And if, say, for example, they've escaped a traumatic religious experience, or they're not quite sure if they are religious anymore, maybe they're still going to church and they're afraid to lose their family, things like that, what would you say to somebody who has had a less than stellar experience with religion and would like to find a life and find peace and find joy outside of that?
I think a lot of what we're afraid of losing is community. And that does happen to some extent, because leaving the church, I left a lot of community. However, the community that I have formed after has been more genuine. I didn't realize how much of a facade you have to be maintaining these church relationships, how much you aren't real about who you are and what you're struggling with.
Yes.
And so, yes, you will lose some community, 100%. But the community that you will then learn and forge will be a much realer and safer bond.
Yes, 100%. Man, you hit the nail on the head. Because I was just telling my boyfriend the other day, he did not grow up religious at all. So he, like, this podcast is like a wild experience to him. He's like, wait, Revelations, what's that? Yeah, when he heard about he didn't believe me. He was like, that's not true. You're lying. And I was telling him, I said, some of my best friends in my entire life are devout Christians, like some of the best people I know. I said, but in church, my whole life, I always felt like an outsider. In children's church, I only ever had like one friend, and it was usually the same friend that was my friend outside of church. And we just happened to go to church together. We would go from church to church, and I would just never feel a connection with anybody. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It was pretend. It was fake. And for everybody else, it was real. They acted like it was. And for me, I think I was just pretending the whole time. And I just didn't know how to pretend that it was real enough. And like you said, ever since I started this podcast and I started meeting people and interviewing them, I've made such a wonderful circle of people that I know, and just genuine, great, talented, funny people that I can just email at any point and be like, I've got a weird question for you, but what about this? Or can you hop on? I want to talk to you about this. And I think you're right. I think that fear of the loss of the sense of community is huge, that brotherhood and that familial feeling. And they're never taught in church that outside of church, there is also a wonderful, fantastic community waiting for you. It just doesn't involve, I think we're so used to having to work so hard for our community that the idea that there's a community we don't have to do any kind of difficult daily work for, it's just a foreign idea.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for anybody listening, in the show notes, I'm going to post a link to Jenna's YouTube channel, to JA's author website, where you can check out. I saw one book. Is that the only book that's available on your website right now?
So I have two. I have a adult thriller that's a gritty vampire book.
Nice.
They are not sparkly vampires. And then I have a middle grade chapter book that is like cute and fluffy and adorable, and it's about a rescue cat and a puppy dog. So
that's wonderful.
Like as far apart on the spectrum as you please.
Yeah, but I think it's awesome that you're like exploring all those avenues of yourself. But I wanted to thank you so much for, first of all, reaching out to me in the first place. For people who didn't grow up religious, they don't understand like the bravery that it takes to reach out and be like, I want to tell my story on camera, and I want you to post it online where anybody who looks up my name can find it. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. And your time and your wisdom and your personality. You're just so fun. You're so bubbly. I've loved talking to you.
Thank you. It's been absolutely enjoyable. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And I look forward to talking to both of you. I believe it's Tuesday, the 20th. Is that Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday. Something like that. I'm talking to both of you next week. There were so many questions that I had for you as I was writing them down. And I was like, oh, nope, that's the one I got to ask for them both. Nope, I got to ask them both that one. Oh, it was so hard to like not ask you questions about your marriage that I know I want to like save for a next time. But there will be a next time for anybody listening. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful Saturday.
You too.
All right. I'll talk to you later.